It seems like followers of the Kardashians either love or hate Scott Disick, and even though there are obviously reasons for people to dislike him, his life story is honestly so sad. He's been through so much trauma, and he tried to keep it all hidden for the longest time. And you guys will never believe the shocking truth about Scott's tragic life. One of the major challenges that Scott still has trouble acknowledging is the unexpected loss of both of his parents. Since he was an only child, the only family that he had were his mom Bonnie and his dad Jeffrey. In 2013, the life Scott had known for years came crashing down completely. Scott's parents didn't make very many appearances on the Kardashians reality show or spin-offs, but for a while, Bonnie had been feeling pretty sick from a long-time liver condition. And when her health took a sharp turn for the worse, Scott's entire world started falling apart. In October 2013, Bonnie sadly passed away at 63 years old. Scott and Jeffrey were able to be by her side at the time, but their lives were turned upside down by the loss, which is why what happened next was totally insane. In January 2014, less than 3 months later, Jeffrey also passed away at 63 years old. The loss basically came out of nowhere, and Scott's world was even more shaken up. Scott was only 30 years old when he lost both of his parents unexpectedly. They were the only immediate family he had, so it was extremely hard for him to grieve their untimely losses. But soon, processing his emotional pain became even more difficult. Less than a year after losing both his mom and dad, Scott appeared in the spin-off Kourtney and Khloe Take the Hamptons. Kourtney was pregnant with their third child at the time, but that wasn't the only change. For Scott, the location of the show itself was now a crazy challenge. The Kardashians were the only family Scott had left, but joining their spin-off that year was incredibly rough. He explained that being so close to where he and his parents had lived in Long Island made him very uncomfortable. What happened next was truly bizarre. Unfortunately, Scott didn't deal with his grief in a healthy way at all. He leaned into substance use to numb his pain, and it was really scary. We'd seen Scott struggle after indulging in adult beverages in the past, but this was on a new, terrifying level. While he was partying one night, Scott consumed an unbelievable amount of substances, but on top of that, he also took almost all of his sleeping medication. It was a recipe for disaster, and he needed serious help. Scott actually had to go to the emergency room to make sure he was going to survive the night. He and Kourtney later talked and decided that he needed to check himself into a rehab facility. What he confessed to the cameras later was pretty astonishing. Scott revealed that he had been suffering for years from problems related to his substance use. I mean, he admitted to having a dependency on substances 4 years earlier, but he was finally opening up about how serious his mental health issues really were. Scott said that he was so depressed because of losing both of his parents in the last year. He knew the change he needed to make included getting professional help from a rehab facility, but what happened after that was honestly devastating. Scott didn't complete the entire 30 days he had committed to at the beginning of his rehab stay. He was spiraling, but he wasn't ready to take the next step to recovery. Over the next few years, that became more and more clear in a startling way. Scott's substance use became such a major problem, it was affecting every area of his life, but it mainly impacted his relationship with Kourtney and how present he was for their 3 kids. Eventually, Kourtney felt like she had no other option but to make a life-changing decision. In 2015, Kourtney called it quits with Scott for good. They had always gotten back together after their breakups in the past, but not this time. And when Kourtney moved on with another man, Scott handled it in an alarming way. Throughout the course of their 9-year relationship, Kourtney was one of Scott's only sources of stability. So when she started officially dating Eunice Benjamin in 2017, Scott was completely crushed. What he did next was so nerve-wracking. That summer was rough for Scott, and he spent a lot of time partying. His mental health was at a low point, and he was clearly coping by using substances. In August, Scott found himself in a dangerous and intense situation. He was reportedly held on a 5150, which means he was either found to be a danger to himself or someone else. Usually people held on 5150s are hospitalized involuntarily for 72 hours, but Scott ended up being released a little bit earlier, and the reason why is shocking. Supposedly, Scott's mental health wasn't the entire reason for the 5150. He allegedly had a severe liver condition, which had been caused by years of substance use, and what really happened before he was hospitalized was ridiculously eye-opening. Apparently, Kris and Kourtney called for help when they realized Scott wasn't taking his medication anymore. With all the partying he had been doing, the medication was basically saving Scott's liver, so when he stopped taking it altogether, his entire life was at stake. At some point, Scott finally realized the importance of taking his liver medication. It seemed like he was actually toning down his crazy lifestyle for a while, and in a 2020 episode of Keeping Up with the Kardashians, he started to finally make peace with his past after a seriously unexpected visit. Uncle Dave, who had been a longtime friend of Scott's parents, dropped off some old family photos for Scott. He was the only person Scott could talk to about Bonnie and Jeffrey, but that started to change when Scott took a phenomenal step in his healing journey. Scott admitted that it was so hard to talk about his parents, but he Kourtney knew that the only way his kids would ever feel connected to them was if he kept their memory alive. He acknowledged that talking about his mom and dad more was necessary for his kids. That moment was huge for Scott, and it seemed like he was starting to make genuine progress. Instead of running from his emotional pain, he was finally dealing with it. I don't think it's a coincidence that at the same time, his co-parenting relationship with Kourtney was also incredibly well. Scott confessed that coming to terms with not being in a romantic relationship with Kourtney was insanely difficult. However, it seemed like they had both been trying to be there for their kids however they could. But then Scott's unmanaged grief came back in an unthinkable way. Scott knew that he still hadn't tackled the pain of losing his parents. The emotional challenges that it presented were just too much for him to handle on his own. He had been in and out of rehab several times over the years, but what he decided to do next was surprising. In May 2020, the Daily Mail reported that Scott had checked himself into a Colorado facility. The publication claimed that he was addressing his substance use, mental health, and how to be a better dad, but allegedly that wasn't accurate, and the truth was almost unbelievable. Scott's lawyer, Marty Singer, released a statement to E! News that explained what had really happened. Apparently, Scott had checked into the facility to work on his past traumas, including the loss of his parents, but that was before he went through a bizarre violation of privacy. Scott was reportedly planning on filing a lawsuit with All Points North Lodge, the facility where he'd briefly been staying. A photo of him attending a meeting had been published in the article from the Daily Mail, and it seemed like it had come from the rehab center. But what Scott said next was honestly insane. Less than a year later, Scott released his own statement. He announced that all of the issues he had with the lodge had been resolved. Not only that, but they hadn't been at fault for the privacy violation, and his reason for publicly sharing those details were really admirable. Scott revealed that the stigma around mental health was challenging enough to handle. He didn't want people to feel like the facility wasn't a safe place to seek help and said that everyone deserves to be healthy. His perspective at the time was refreshingly positive. In October 2020, an inside source told E! News that Scott really was doing much better. As a result, he and Kourtney were co-parenting really well. They were even able to hang out with each other and be friendly. But not long after, everything changed. In January 2021, Kourtney and Travis Barker confirmed that they had been dating for a couple of months. Scott wasn't exactly happy about the relationship, but he thought it was just a casual romance. But later that year, he made a jaw-dropping realization. After Kourtney got engaged to Travis in October 2021, her relationship with Scott became even more strained. It took a while for Scott to come to terms with the fact that he wasn't ever going to have a romantic connection with her again. But it wasn't just Kourtney he felt like he was losing, not by a mile. When Kourtney and Travis officially got married in May 2022, Scott felt pushed away by the Kardashians. They had been the only family he had left after his parents passed away. What he admitted to Khloe in an episode of the Kardashians was seriously heartbreaking. Scott mentioned that he knew he had trouble accepting Kourtney and Travis at first, but he was doing his best. He confessed that he'd rather be around them and the rest of the family than not be invited to family events at all. Since then, it seems like Scott has been included in family events here and there. Kris still refers to him as her second son, and the Kardashians joined together late last year to support him. He was going through more difficulty with his substance use at the time, but this time seemed different. Scott apparently knew that he needed more intense help and was open to receiving inpatient help at a facility. An inside source told Us Weekly that Scott seemed more determined than before to finally tackle his mental health and substance issues, and it sounds like that's starting to slowly pay off. Scott recently turned 40 years old, and he supposedly feels more at peace than ever. He's still trying to deal with his depression and past traumas, but it seems like things are finally starting to look up. Sources have said that Scott has been focusing more on his kids than anything lately. Hopefully that's true, because Scott definitely has a lot of darkness in his life, and spending time with his children might be a positive light for him. But anyway, what do you guys think about all this? What do you think about Scott's reported liver condition? And what do you think of the tragic difficulties of his life? Let me know in the comments below.